There are many ways to document the history and culture of Oklahoma freedmen. But to begin, it's important to take note. There are many individuals who will make claim to having an ancestor from any one of the 574 federally recognized tribes and claims that an ancestor was a full-blood member of a specific tribe. And the questions come up in terms of tribal affiliation. Was it Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, or Seminole? Or was it some of the other tribes that we may hear about? Was it Apache or the one we frequently hear? Was it Blackfoot? There are many who make such claims, but they have very little proof. Some have simply been misinformed. Oh, well, Grandma always said, but what if someone misinformed Grandma? And this story is passed down from one generation to another. Some have an emotional tie that's even affecting their identity, although they may have been raised in a completely different culture, but now they're embracing this native culture to which there is an emotional tie. And there are others who've embraced communities that have long been absorbed by other communities, whether it's the larger majority community, whether it's the African American community, it's not known. But many of these groups that have been absorbed left few, if any, records that can be studied. They left no evidence. The question will arise, can you prove it? Can you prove who you are or who you say that you are? Well, there are 5 tribal communities of African Native Americans that have a multitude of records found on the local level as well as on the national level. These 5 tribal communities are the Oklahoma Freedmen, and many descendants today are working to preserve that history and present the documented evidence and bring it forward. They are Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Muskogee Creek, and Seminole Freedmen. One important fact that distinguishes Oklahoma Freedmen from many others is that there is evidence that proves their ties to these nations from the days of removal from the Southeast to Indian Territory, of course, which is now the state of Oklahoma. These claims can be proven on multiple levels. On the national level, there's the congressional record, records coming straight out of Congress before and after the Civil War. There are the records of the Dawes allotment era after the Dawes Act was passed through Congress. For more than 10 years between 1898 and 1914, the process of allotting lands within those 5 tribes began, and they left a plethora of records. On the Oklahoma state level, there are millions of records preserved by the Oklahoma Historical Society, which functions as the state archives, and incredible records there. On the tribal level, there are documents from sources including their tribal courts that operated in the 19th century, as well as some removal records that are still retained and preserved. And even in tribal newspapers that one finds in the late 1800s, they are reflecting those individuals known as freedmen from those very communities. And likewise, on the academic level, scholars and oral historians, there have been initiatives that have been launched that have captured this very rich history. Looking at the congressional level, Almost every Congress, once it began, you will find records, whether it's a House document or a Senate document or a miscellaneous document that one may find, whether it's the first or second session, one will find evidence of the freedmen. This one document showing something from the 42nd Congress and discussing a petition of Choctaw and Chickasaw nations. And the focus was the freedmen of those two nations. On the Oklahoma state level, there's some other things that one can explore. Keeping in mind that OHS, as it's frequently called, the Oklahoma Historical Society, the structure of which serves as the state archives, is so rich with incredible holdings of freedmen and their histories, their affairs, their status, their citizenship of all of these 5 nations. And one can see some of the links and reels of microfilm, the CHN reels of microfilm, reflecting things that will contain information pertaining to freedmen from the Cherokee freedmen as just an example. And as you look closely, you'll see, oh, Cherokee freedmen, including the orphan roll of 1880. Who knew? A list of Black persons whose names appear on the Clifton roll of 1896, but who were missed on the authenticated roll of 1880. There's an index to the census roll of Cherokee freedmen. Incredible records over the years. And this goes on and on. Cherokee strip freedmen payment rolls. They're so heavily documented. Choctaw freedmen, those rolls of microfilm, the CTN records, those rolls coming and reflecting the Choctaw Agency, covering the years of 1885, which was the year of citizenship when it was granted, up to the close of the 19th century. And all kinds of things. Those who elected to leave the nation, those whose citizenship was perhaps doubted, and those who were enumerated in the various census, especially at the time when citizenship was granted in 1885, and the various districts from which they come. And it goes on and on and on. Even per capita payment rolls that many are unaware that were ever even made, but the records are there. And they also tell the story of who they were. Chickasaw freedmen, not as extensive holdings, but still there. Records pertaining to citizenship and census records. But then there are those that also put challenges, those who are saying, why am I on a freedman roll and not on a blood roll when their fathers were Chickasaw? Extensive records that are there. Creek freedmen, the CRN records, also very, very full of data, looking at families. And there have been some texts that have been published pertaining to those families, looking at the history of families from 1901 to 1908, just as an example. And some of the records also reflected the National Archives microfilm, but being taken from some of these same documents from the Muskogee Creek Nation. The records go on and on. Seminole freedmen, well documented by scholars, as one can see by the titles of these texts that have been written over the years. In addition to the Oklahoma Historical Society providing links to information that will also reflect Seminole freedmen. Scholars have not been asleep. They have been documenting records over the years from the 1970s to current times as well. Rich, rich histories that are there. And even today, descendants are now coming forth and are telling their stories. It is important to understand descendants are also forming organizations and have been for the last 20, 25 years, documenting and working hard to preserve their own history and to become advocates for the descendant groups. And these are just a few, these are just four. There are others. This history is richly documented, and there are numerous descendant groups reflecting this history, all of which are dedicated to the sole mission of recording their historical truth with proof of who they are. The Oklahoma Freedmen, yes, a rich history indeed, but more importantly, they are working very hard to place their history back on the soil from which it came.